Long ago, beyond towering mountains, endless forests, and fields of golden wheat, there stood a prosperous kingdom that seemed almost perfect. From a distance, it looked like a land blessed with peace, wealth, and happiness. Magnificent castles reached toward the sky, busy marketplaces echoed with laughter, and the people appeared to live comfortable lives. But beneath that beautiful surface, a terrifying truth was hidden. The kingdom was ruled by a king whose heart had been consumed by greed. To him, nothing in the world mattered more than gold. He believed that wealth meant power and that no amount of treasure could ever be enough. Every time he discovered a new source of gold, his hunger for more only grew stronger. Deep beneath the royal palace lay enormous vaults overflowing with gold coins, priceless jewels, golden crowns, royal scepters, and treasures collected from every corner of the kingdom. Yet, no matter how much he possessed, the king was never satisfied. While the king dreamed of endless riches, life in the countryside was very different. In a small village on the edge of the kingdom lived a poor miller. He worked from sunrise until long after sunset, grinding grain for anyone who could pay a few coins. Despite his endless labor, he barely earned enough to feed himself and his only daughter. His daughter was known throughout the village for her kindness, honesty, and gentle nature. She never complained about their poverty. Instead, she spent her days helping her father, caring for their tiny home, and treating everyone she met with warmth and respect. The villagers often said that although the miller owned very little, he had been blessed with the greatest treasure of all, a daughter with a pure heart. Unfortunately, the miller himself had one terrible flaw. He loved impressing people. Whenever important visitors came to the village, he exaggerated stories about himself and his family, hoping others would admire him. Most people simply laughed and ignored his harmless boasting. But one ordinary morning, everything changed. News spread quickly through the marketplace that the king was traveling across the countryside to inspect his kingdom. The streets immediately filled with excitement. Merchants stopped selling their goods, children ran through the village, and everyone gathered along the road, hoping to catch a glimpse of their ruler. The miller saw this as the opportunity of a lifetime. If I can impress the king, perhaps he will reward me. Perhaps our days of poverty will finally come to an end. As the royal carriage approached, surrounded by armored guards and fluttering banners, the miller stepped forward and bowed deeply before the king. The king looked down at the nervous old man. "Speak," he commanded. The miller's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he should remain silent, but his desire to appear important overcame his common sense. "My king," he said confidently, "my daughter possesses an extraordinary gift, unlike anyone else in the world." The king raised an eyebrow with curiosity. "And what remarkable gift is that?" The miller took a deep breath, then uttered the lie that would change both their lives forever. "My daughter can spin ordinary straw into pure gold." For a brief moment, the entire crowd fell silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The miller instantly realized what he had done. His face turned pale, but it was already too late. The king's eyes sparkled with uncontrollable greed. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not the smile of a kind ruler. It was the smile of a man who had just discovered the greatest treasure he could ever imagine. And at that very moment, without even knowing it, the innocent daughter had stepped onto a path that would lead her into one of the darkest nightmares ever told. The king wasted no time. Without asking another question or giving the miller's daughter a chance to defend herself, he ordered his royal guards to bring her to the palace immediately.
Back in the village, the young woman was quietly sweeping the floor of her tiny home when the sound of galloping horses shattered the peaceful afternoon. Moments later, heavily armored soldiers surrounded the cottage. "The king commands your presence at the royal palace," the captain announced. Confused and frightened, she looked toward her father. His face had turned ghostly pale. He couldn't even meet his eyes. At that moment,
she knew something was terribly wrong. The journey to the palace felt endless. As the enormous castle gates slowly opened before her, she felt as though she were walking into another world, a world where she did not belong. The towering stone walls blocked the sunlight. The corridors were cold and silent. Every echo of her footsteps filled her heart with fear. Finally, the guards led her into the king's throne room. The king stared at her with eyes filled not with kindness, but with greed. "So," he said calmly, "I hear you possess a remarkable gift." The young woman frowned in confusion. "What gift, Your Majesty?" The king leaned forward. "Cold certainty. The gift of spinning ordinary straw into pure gold." Her heart skipped a beat. She looked at her father, who stood trembling near the doorway. In that instant, she understood everything. "My king," she cried desperately, "it's not true. My father was mistaken. I cannot perform such magic." But the king refused to listen. Instead, a cruel smile crossed his face. "If you truly cannot," he said, "then you are of no use to me." With a wave of his hand, he ordered the guards forward. They escorted her through a long hallway until they reached a massive wooden door reinforced with iron. The door creaked open. Inside was an enormous room, completely filled with piles upon piles of ordinary straw. In the center stood a spinning wheel. Nothing else. The king stepped inside and looked around proudly. "By sunrise," he declared, "every piece of this straw must be spun into pure gold. If you succeed, your life will be spared. But if you fail," he paused just long enough for his words to sink in, "you will die." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her. Metal locks clicked into place. Silence filled the room. The young woman slowly turned in circles, staring at the endless mountains of straw surrounding her. There was no escape, no magic, no hope. She collapsed beside the spinning wheel, buried her face in her hands, and began to cry. Hour after hour passed. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the pale moonlight slipping through a narrow window remained. Then, a strange sound echoed from somewhere behind her. Tap, tap, tap. She froze. Her tears stopped. Slowly, she turned toward the sound. Standing in the shadows was a tiny, mysterious man with an unsettling smile on his face. His bright eyes glittered in the darkness as though he had been waiting for this very moment. "I can hear your sorrow," he whispered. "And perhaps I can solve your impossible problem." The young woman gasped and quickly stepped away from the tiny stranger. Her heart pounded so loudly that she could barely hear herself breathe. The mysterious little man stood motionless in the shadows, his crooked smile never fading. He wasn't frightening because of his size. He was frightening because of how calm he seemed. It was as if he had known she would be there all along. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The little man gave a short chuckle. "Names are strange things. Sometimes they have power. Tonight, you don't need to know mine." He slowly walked toward the spinning wheel. His tiny boots made soft tapping sounds against the stone floor. "I know why you're crying," he said. "The king wants gold." He glanced at the mountains of straw surrounding them. "And you have no way to give it to him.
Fresh tears rolled down the young woman's face. "I've told him the truth," she sobbed. "I don't know any magic. By sunrise, I'll be dead." For a brief moment, the little man simply stared at her. Then his smile grew even wider. "What if I told you," he whispered, "that I can spin every piece of this straw into pure gold before the sun rises?" The young woman looked at him in disbelief. "That's impossible." The strange visitor tilted his head. "Many things seem impossible until someone does them." He slowly placed one small hand on the spinning wheel. But nothing comes without a price. The room suddenly felt colder. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously. The little man looked at the necklace around her neck, a simple gold chain that had belonged to her mother. "I want that." She instinctively held the necklace tightly. It was the last precious memory she had of her family. For a long moment she hesitated. If she refused, she would almost certainly die. If she accepted, she would lose the one thing she treasured most. With shaking hands, she slowly removed the necklace. Her fingers lingered on it for one final moment before placing it into the little man's waiting hand. He smiled with quiet satisfaction. A fair bargain. The moment the necklace touched his palm, he sat before the spinning wheel. Without another word,
he began to spin. The wheel started turning, slowly at first, then faster and faster. Soon it was spinning so quickly that it became nothing more than a blur. Something unbelievable began to happen. The dry yellow straw disappeared into the wheel, and shimmering strands of pure gold emerged from the other side. The room filled with the warm glow of golden thread. Hour after hour, the little man worked tirelessly. He never seemed to grow tired. He never stopped smiling. Outside, the night grew darker. Inside, the piles of straw grew smaller, until finally, just before dawn, the very last bundle of straw was transformed into brilliant gold. The little man climbed down from the spinning wheel and brushed the dust from his tiny clothes. "Our bargain is complete," he said softly. Then, without another word, he walked toward the darkest corner of the room. The young woman blinked for only a second, and when she looked again, he was gone. No footsteps, no open door, no sound, only silence. A few moments later, the first rays of morning sunlight entered through the narrow window. Heavy footsteps echoed outside. The iron lock clicked. The great wooden door slowly opened. The king stepped inside, expecting to see failure. Instead, his eyes widened in astonishment. Every handful of straw had become glittering gold. For a long moment he stood speechless. Then a slow smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man whose greed had just become even greater. The young woman had survived the first night, but she had no idea the true nightmare was only beginning. The king walked slowly through the room, running his fingers across the shimmering strands of gold. Every thread was real. Every strand sparkled in the morning light. His ministers stood frozen in amazement. The royal guards exchanged nervous glances. No one could explain what they were seeing. Only the king smiled, not with gratitude, but with greed. His eyes burned with excitement. If she can turn one room of straw into gold, then she can fill my entire kingdom with treasure." The young woman stood silently in the corner, exhausted after the terrifying night. She wanted to tell the king the truth. She wanted to explain that she had no magical gift. But before she could speak, the king raised his hand. "Follow me." The guards surrounded her once again. She was led through another long hallway, deeper into the palace than ever before. They finally stopped before an enormous iron door. When it opened, her heart nearly stopped. The room beyond was nearly twice the size of the first one. From floor to ceiling, it was packed with endless mountains of straw. There was another spinning wheel waiting in the center. The king turned toward her. "If you spin all of this straw into gold before sunrise, I shall reward you greatly. But if you fail," he smiled coldly, "you already know the price." Before she could beg for mercy, the heavy door slammed shut once again. The locks echoed through the chamber. She was alone. Again. Her legs grew weak. She slowly sank to the floor. "How can this be happening?" she whispered through tears. "I have nothing left." The room became darker as the evening faded into night. The silence felt heavier than before. Every shadow seemed alive. Then the familiar sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. She looked toward the darkness. The tiny, mysterious man stepped into the moonlight with the same unsettling smile. "I see," he said softly. "The king's greed has grown." The young woman rushed toward him. "Please," she cried, "you saved my life once. I have nothing left to give you." The little man studied her carefully. Then his eyes rested on the ring upon her finger. A simple golden ring, the last valuable thing she still owned. "My price is smaller than your life," he said calmly. "I'll take the ring." She looked down at it. It had been her mother's final gift before she passed away. Losing it would mean losing the last piece of her family. Tears filled her eyes. For several long moments, she couldn't move. But she already knew the answer. Slowly, she slipped the ring from her finger. Her hand trembled as she placed it into his tiny palm. The mysterious man nodded. Another fair bargain. He climbed on to the wooden stool beside the spinning wheel. Once again, the wheel began to turn.
Faster, faster, and faster still. The room echoed with its endless rhythm. Bundle after bundle of straw disappeared into the spinning wheel. Golden thread poured out endlessly. The glow became so bright that it illuminated every corner of the enormous chamber. The young woman watched in silence. This time, she wasn't only afraid. She was beginning to fear the strange little man himself. Who was he? How could he perform such impossible magic? And why did he always appear when no one else could? As the final bundle of straw vanished, the spinning wheel finally came to a stop. The little man climbed down. He smiled once more. "You may live another day." Then, just as before, he disappeared into the shadows without leaving the slightest trace. A few moments later, the first light of dawn entered the room. The king returned. When he saw an even greater mountain of glittering gold waiting for him, his eyes filled with uncontrollable delight. He laughed loudly. The sound echoed throughout the palace. But his laughter carried no joy, only endless greed. Instead of setting the young woman free, he had already made another terrible decision, one that would force her into the most dangerous bargain of all. The king could barely contain his excitement. He walked around the mountain of golden thread as though he were admiring the greatest treasure in the world. His ministers applauded. The royal guards lowered their heads. No one dared question the king. But the young woman felt no relief. She knew the nightmare was far from over. The king slowly turned toward her. His eyes gleamed with the same dangerous hunger. "You have exceeded all my expectations," he said. "But one final test remains." Before she could answer, the guards escorted her even deeper into the palace. They passed through silent corridors, ancient stone staircases, and forgotten halls where no sunlight ever reached. Finally, they stopped before the largest chamber she had ever seen. The enormous iron doors swung open. Her breath caught in her throat. The room was gigantic. Towering piles of straw stretched from one end of the chamber to the other, reaching almost to the ceiling. There was enough straw to fill an entire village. In the center stood another spinning wheel, waiting. The king looked at her with a cold smile. "If all this becomes gold by sunrise," he said, "I will make you my queen." His voice suddenly turned sharp. "But if it does not, you will die before the morning sun rises." The heavy door slammed shut. The sound echoed like thunder. This time, the young woman didn't cry immediately. She simply stood there in silence. She had nothing left. No necklace, no ring. Nothing of value remained. As darkness filled the chamber, hopelessness settled into her heart. Hours passed. She stared at the endless sea of straw, knowing there was no escape. Then the familiar footsteps echoed once again. Tap, tap, tap. The tiny, mysterious man emerged from the darkness. He looked around the enormous chamber and smiled knowingly. So, the king always wants more. The young woman rushed to him. "You've already taken everything I own," she pleaded. "I have nothing left." The little man nodded slowly. "I know." He folded his hands behind his back and walked quietly around the room. Then he stopped. "There is one thing." She looked at him with confusion. What could I possibly have left? The little man raised his eyes and spoke in a calm, almost gentle voice. "If you become queen one day," he said, "you will have a child." The room fell completely silent. "I want your firstborn." The words struck her like lightning. She stepped backward in horror. "My child? No! I could never promise something like that." The little man's smile disappeared. "As you wish." He turned toward the shadows as if preparing to leave. The young woman's heart raced. If he walked away, she would die before sunrise. She looked at the endless mountains of straw, then at the locked door, then back at the mysterious stranger. She was trapped. Tears streamed down her face. "I don't even know if I'll ever become queen," she whispered desperately, "and I may never have a child." The little man remained silent.
Finally, with a broken voice, she nodded. "I promise." The tiny man smiled once again. "A bargain has been made." Without another word, he climbed onto the spinning stool. The wheel began to turn. Slowly at first, then faster than ever before. The entire chamber seemed to tremble. The straw vanished in endless waves. Brilliant golden thread poured from the spinning wheel like flowing sunlight. Hour after hour, the impossible miracle continued. By the time the first rays of dawn entered the chamber, not a single piece of straw remained. Only mountains of glittering gold. The little man stepped down from the wheel. He looked at the young woman one final time. "Do not forget your promise." Then he disappeared into the darkness. Moments later, the great doors opened. The king entered. When he saw the enormous chamber overflowing with gold, he laughed louder than ever before. His dream had finally come true. True to his word, he crowned the miller's daughter as his queen. The entire kingdom celebrated. Music filled the streets. Church bells rang across the land. The people believed a beautiful fairy tale had come true. But hidden beneath the joy, a terrible promise waited in silence. And one day, someone would come to collect it. Time passed. The terrifying nights in the palace slowly faded into memory. The young woman, now the queen, tried to leave the past behind. She buried herself in her royal duties, treating the people with kindness and compassion. Unlike the king, she cared deeply for the poor and often opened the palace gates to those in need. The people adored her new queen. Many believed she had brought hope and warmth back to the kingdom. As for the king, his treasure vaults continued to grow. Every day, he counted his gold. Every day, he dreamed of gaining even more. The strange nights of spinning straw had become nothing more than a distant memory. Or so they thought. One spring morning, the palace erupted with celebration. The bells rang across the kingdom. Trumpets echoed from the castle walls. The queen had given birth to a healthy baby. It was the happiest day of her life. As she held her child for the very first time, tears filled her eyes. She gently kissed the baby's forehead and whispered, "I will always protect you." For the first time in many years, she truly felt at peace. Days turned into weeks. The celebrations slowly came to an end. Life inside the palace returned to normal. Then, one quiet evening, as the queen sat alone in the royal nursery, softly rocking her baby to sleep, a cold wind swept through the room. The candles flickered. The fire in the fireplace suddenly dimmed. The queen frowned. Every door was closed. Every window was locked. So where had the wind come from? Then she heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Her blood ran cold. She knew that sound. Slowly, she turned toward the darkest corner of the nursery. A familiar figure stepped out of the shadows. Small, crooked, smiling. The mysterious little man had returned. He looked exactly the same. not a single day older. "Good evening, Your Majesty," he said with a quiet grin. The Queen's face turned pale. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be happening." The little man slowly walked toward the cradle. His eyes rested on the sleeping child. "The time has come." The Queen immediately picked up her baby and held the child tightly against her chest. "What do you want?" she asked, though deep inside, she already knew the answer. The little man smiled. "You made a promise. When you had nothing left to give, you promised me your firstborn child." The Queen shook her head violently. "I was terrified. I didn't know what I was saying. I was trying to save my life." The little man's expression remained unchanged. A promise is still a promise. He slowly stretched out his tiny hand. "The child." The Queen burst into tears. She fell to her knees. "Please," she whispered, "I'll give you gold. I'll give you jewels. I'll give you the entire royal treasury if you wish." The little man laughed softly. "What use do I have for gold? I can make gold whenever I please." She tried again. "I'll give you my crown, my kingdom, anything."
"I want only what was promised." Silence filled the room. The Queen held her baby so tightly that she could hear the child's tiny heartbeat. She couldn't imagine life without her son. Seeing her desperation, the little man's smile faded. For the first time, he seemed almost thoughtful. After a long silence, he spoke again. "I will give you one final chance." The Queen looked up through her tears. "For 3 days, you may try to discover my true name. If, before the 3rd sunset, you can speak my name aloud, I will leave this palace forever, and your child will remain yours. But if you fail," he glanced once more at the sleeping baby, "I will return, and I will take what belongs to me." Before the Queen could say another word, the candles flickered again, the shadows shifted, and the mysterious little man vanished into the darkness. The nursery became silent once more. The Queen stood frozen, clutching her child close to her heart. 3 days. That was all she had. 3 days to uncover the greatest secret of the mysterious stranger, or lose her child forever. The Queen did not sleep that night. She remained beside her child's cradle until sunrise, replaying every word the mysterious little man had spoken. "Find my true name." It sounded so simple, yet she knew it would be nearly impossible. As dawn broke over the kingdom, she summoned her most trusted advisers, royal scholars, and messengers to the throne room. The Queen wasted no time. "Ride to every village, every town, every castle, and every mountain," she commanded. "Speak to the oldest people you can find. Search every record. Learn every strange and forgotten name. No matter how unusual it sounds, bring every name back to me." The messengers bowed and rode out in every direction. For the rest of the day, the palace became a place of desperate hope. Scrolls covered the Queen's desk. Names arrived by the hundreds. Some were common. Others were ancient and nearly forgotten. As the sun began to set, the little man appeared once again, without opening a door, without making a sound, he simply stepped out of the shadows. "Well," he asked with a smile, "do you know my name?" The queen took a deep breath. She began reading from the long list. "Is your name Thomas?" The little man laughed. "No." "William?" "No." "Edmund?" "No." She continued. "Sebastian?" "No." "Bartholomew?" The little man chuckled. "Not even close." Name after name echoed through the silent nursery. Each answer was the same. No. Finally, the queen lowered the list. She had failed. The little man smiled confidently. One day remains. He tipped his tiny hat, then disappeared into the darkness once again. The next morning, the search became even more desperate. Messengers traveled beyond the borders of the kingdom. Some climbed snowy mountains. Others crossed rushing rivers and wandered through forgotten valleys. Every strange name they discovered was sent back to the palace. That evening, the little man returned. The queen read every new name she had received. "Is it Alaric?" "No." "Leofric?" "No." "Cedric?" "No." She tried dozens more. Each answer remained unchanged. No. When the final name had been spoken, silence filled the room. The little man could barely hide his amusement. His smile grew wider than ever. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "our bargain will finally be complete." With that, he vanished. The queen collapsed into a chair. Only one day remained. She buried her face in her hands. For the first time, she began to believe she had already lost. Meanwhile, far beyond the palace, one exhausted royal messenger was still searching. As night fell, he found himself deep inside an ancient forest where few people ever dared to travel. The trees were twisted. The air was strangely still. Only the sound of distant owls echoed through the darkness. Then, a faint orange glow appeared between the trees. Curious, the messenger quietly followed the light. Wonder filled him as he found a tiny cottage unlike anything he had ever seen. Its crooked chimney released thin streams of smoke. Outside, a small fire burned brightly, and dancing around the flames was the mysterious little man. The messenger quickly hid behind a thick oak tree. The strange creature laughed, clapped his hands, and spun around the fire with wild excitement. Then, in a loud, cheerful voice, he began to sing. "Tomorrow I'll claim the royal child. No one knows my secret name. No queen on earth can ever guess that Rumpelstiltskin is my name." The messenger's eyes widened. He could hardly believe what he had just heard. Without making a sound, he slipped away into the darkness, then raced towards the palace as fast as his horse could carry him. At last, the queen had one final chance, and with it, the power to defeat the mysterious stranger forever. The final day had arrived. From the moment the sun rose above the kingdom, an uneasy silence settled over the royal palace. The queen stood beside the nursery window, holding her child close. She had barely slept. Although the messenger had returned before dawn with astonishing news, she remained cautious. What if he had heard him incorrectly? What if it had all been a trick? One mistake, and she would lose her child forever. The royal messenger knelt before the queen. "I swear upon my life, your majesty," he said. "I heard him with my own ears. He danced around a fire deep in the forest, and he sang his own name with great pride. The queen closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 days, a small spark of hope returned. She thanked the messenger and ordered everyone to leave the nursery. This was something she had to face alone. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered over the palace. Rain began to fall against the castle windows. The wind howled through the towers. Then, the room became strangely cold. The candles flickered. The fire in the fireplace shrank to glowing embers. The queen tightened her grip around her baby. She knew he was here.
From the darkest corner of the room, the tiny figure slowly stepped into the light. The mysterious little man wore the same crooked smile. His bright eyes glittered with confidence. He bowed politely. "Good evening, Your Majesty. I trust you've enjoyed your 3 days." The queen said nothing. The little man looked at the sleeping child and stretched out his tiny hands. "Our bargain is finished. The child, if you please." The queen gently rocked her baby. Then she looked directly into his eyes. "I still have one last chance." The little man laughed. "Indeed you do. So, what is my name?" The queen pretended to think carefully. "Is your name Arthur?" The little man burst into laughter. "No." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps Henry?" Again he laughed. "Certainly not." The queen paused. She looked toward the window as though searching her memory. Then she spoke another name. "Could it be Christopher?" The little man shook his head. "You've always been terrible at guessing." His smile grew even wider. Victory seemed only seconds away. The queen slowly turned back toward him. This time, her voice was calm, steady, confident. "Or," she said softly, "is your name?" She allowed the silence to linger. The little man's smile began to fade. "Rumpelstiltskin." The room fell silent. The little man's eyes widened in horror. His face turned pale. For several long seconds, he could not speak. "What?" He stumbled backward. "Who told me that? Who spoke my name?" The queen answered only with a quiet smile. The mysterious little man screamed in rage. "No! That's impossible! No one was supposed to know!" He stomped his foot so hard that the stone floor cracked beneath him. The walls of the nursery trembled. The candles shook violently. His furious cries echoed throughout the palace. "You tricked me! You cheated!" The queen stood her ground. "I did exactly what you challenged me to do. I learned your true name." The little man's anger slowly gave way to despair. He knew the ancient bargain had been broken. According to the magic that bound him, he had lost. His shoulders slumped. His hands trembled. For the first time since they had met, the mysterious stranger looked powerless. He stared one last time at the queen, then at the child he could never claim. The bargain was over, and there was nothing he could do to change it. The nursery remained silent. Only the sound of the rain striking the castle windows could be heard. Rumpelstiltskin stood frozen in disbelief. His bright, confident smile had vanished. In its place was a face twisted with anger, frustration, and defeat. For countless years, no one had ever discovered his true name. Kings had feared him. Merchants had bargained with him. Desperate souls had accepted his impossible deals. Yet no one had ever broken one. Until now. He stared at the queen with burning eyes. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed. The queen held her child even closer.
I did only what any mother would do. I protected my child." Rumpelstiltskin let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You humans are all the same. When fear consumes you, you'll promise anything. And when the danger is past, you beg for mercy." The queen lowered her head. "You are right. I made a terrible promise. I was frightened. I believed I had no other choice. But that does not mean I ever stopped loving my child." For a moment, the little man said nothing. His expression softened ever so slightly. Then, just as quickly, his anger returned. With a furious scream, he slammed his fist against the stone floor. A loud crack echoed through the nursery. The fireplace roared. The windows rattled. Every candle flickered wildly. The palace guards rushed toward the nursery after hearing the terrible noise. They threw open the doors with swords drawn. But the moment they entered, they froze. The room felt unnaturally cold. A powerful force filled the air. None of them dared step closer. The king arrived only moments later. He looked around in confusion. His eyes moved from the frightened guards to the terrified queen, and finally to the strange little man standing in the center of the room. "Who are you?" the king demanded. Rumpelstiltskin slowly turned toward him. A cold smile appeared on his face. "You have forgotten me, but your greed created this entire nightmare." The king frowned. "I don't know what you're talking about." The little man laughed quietly. "No, greedy people rarely remember the price others pay for their desires." The king reached for his sword. Before he could take another step,
a powerful gust of wind swept through the nursery. The flames in the fireplace suddenly turned blue. The shadows along the walls began to twist and move. Rumpelstiltskin looked one final time at the queen. "Our bargain is broken. Your child is safe. But never forget this. Every promise carries a price, and greed always demands payment." The queen nodded silently. She would never forget. The little man's body slowly began to dissolve into countless glowing sparks of golden light. The sparks swirled around the room like fireflies. The wind grew stronger. The candles went out. And then, in a single blinding flash, Rumpelstiltskin disappeared completely. No footprints remained, no shadow, no trace that he had ever been there. Only silence. The queen slowly exhaled. Tears rolled down her face as she kissed her sleeping child. For the first time in years, she finally felt free. Yet somewhere deep inside, she knew that the events of those terrible nights would haunt her for the rest of her life. Morning light slowly spread across the kingdom. The violent storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the palace windows, filling the halls with warmth once again. But inside the royal nursery, no one spoke. The king stood quietly, trying to understand everything he had witnessed. At last he turned toward the queen. What was that creature? And why did it call me the cause of this nightmare? The queen remained silent for a long moment. Then, with tears in her eyes, she told him everything. She told him about the first room filled with straw, about the impossible task, about the mysterious little man who appeared in the darkness, about the necklace she had traded, the ring she had sacrificed, and finally the terrible promise she had made to save her own life. As the queen spoke, the king's face slowly changed. His confidence faded. His pride disappeared. For the first time in many years, he saw the consequences of his own greed. If he had not demanded impossible riches, if he had listened to the truth instead of chasing gold, none of this would have happened. The room fell silent. The king looked toward the child, sleeping peacefully in the cradle. Then he lowered his head. I nearly destroyed my own family because I wanted more gold. Those words echoed in the quiet room. From that day forward, the king was no longer the man he had once been. He ordered the palace treasury to be opened to help the poor. Taxes were reduced. Food was distributed during times of famine. The kingdom slowly became known not for its wealth, but for its justice. As for the queen, she never again wore the crown with pride. Instead, she wore it with humility. She remembered that power meant responsibility, not privilege. And every time she looked at her child, she remembered the promise she had almost paid with a mother's greatest love. Years passed. The mysterious little man was never seen again. Some believed he had vanished forever. Others whispered that he still wandered through forgotten forests, waiting for another desperate soul willing to trade the future for a single chance to survive. Whether those stories were true, no one could say. But one lesson remained. Greed can blind even the wisest of people. A single lie can grow into a nightmare. And every promise, especially one made in fear, carries consequences that may last a lifetime. The tale of Rumpelstiltskin has survived for centuries, not simply because of its magic, but because it reminds us that honesty is worth more than gold, wisdom is stronger than power, and love is the greatest treasure anyone can ever protect. And somewhere, deep within the shadows of an ancient forest, if the wind is perfectly still, some say you can still hear a faint, distant voice laughing, waiting for the next bargain to begin.
Thank you for watching this story. Please like the video and share your favorite moment or lesson in the comments. Subscribe for more legendary tales.